Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third session on economic trajectories. We have 4 papers, 2 of which will be online. The first 2 papers will be online. I'm going to introduce our presenters and give you their biographies, tell you about their wonderful work at first, and then I will sort of yield the stage to the first virtual presentation, then the second. And at the end, we'll have about 15 minutes for discussion. And our wonderful Stacey Nordstrom will be facilitating the involvement of the online people in that process. So our first presentation will be by Emilia Simeonova from Johns Hopkins Carey Business School, where she's been since 2013. Before joining Hopkins, she was an assistant professor at Tufts and then Princeton. Her research is in health and children's human capital formation, and she's currently working on several projects about the intergenerational transmission of health and socioeconomic status. Our second presenter is Ben Rodriguez, who's an economics PhD student at the University of Maryland, College Park. He specializes in macroeconomics, working on a range of topics related to spatial economics, economic development, and the measurement of inflation. Ben's going to be on the job market in the 25-26 academic year. So if you're impressed by his presentation, please get in touch with him about a job. Our third presentation and our first in-person one will be Yu-Jhen Chen. She is a PhD student in sociology at the CUNY Graduate Center and a demography fellow at Baruch College. Her research interests focus on race, ethnicity, immigration, and inequality with a focus on mixed methods. Her current project examines the impact of anti-Asian violence and mental health disparities among low-income older Chinese adults in New York City. And finally, our last presentation will be by Todd Nobles, who's a PhD student in the Department of Sociology at the University of Washington. His research focuses on labor market stratification processes. I'm going to get off the stage now, and I think Stacey has all the capabilities to get the Emilia's presentation up on screen, which it is. So.
Okay, perfect. So hi, everyone, and thanks a lot to Evan for the great introduction. I am excited to present our research on the intergenerational impact of reparations, financial reparations, and the evidence is from Cherokee Nation. I am Emilia Simeonova at Johns Hopkins, and in no particular order, we all equal contributors here. I have Al Fertig, who is a graduate student at the University of Michigan, who will be on the job market next year. So watch out for that one coming out. Randall Akee, who is at Harvard, was recently at UCLA. He's a professor of economics. Adhvaryu, who is at UCSD, and Huayu, who is in Beijing University. So in the hope of keeping time here, let me see if I can get to our presentation. So there's been a lot of talk about reparations, much less talk lately than there was before, but it's been highlighted that American government policies have resulted in some significant harm that has been experienced by various specific groups over time. And of course, when there is harm, there has to be some kind of remedy. And some of those remedies have been reparations. We have done reparations in the past, and those were given to most recent example, Asian Americans and their descendants who were sent to the concentration camps for lack of, well, that was what they were, detention camps in the 1940s. And there have been other attempts, most notably attempts by African-American communities and also economists to justify the need for reparations for slavery and other wrongs done to those communities. We do have a lot of political debate about these issues. We have a lot of ethical and other considerations that we need to look at. But we do have examples of reparations that have been implemented, and relatively little research on the long-term economic impacts of those reparations. I know Evan is working with some co-authors on the Japanese reparations, but will be working on a case of Native Americans receiving reparations for the Trail of Tears experience that they had. Just to highlight that Japanese Americans received about $1.5 billion in reparations, and that the law that was used to round up those communities and put them in detention camps is the same law that is being used today for other groups. So we have a very good example here of how policy can result in harms, and those harms will have to be remedied in the future. So what we do here is we use a very extreme case of harm, but the reparations come much later. So we'll be using evidence from this relatively unknown case between the Eastern Cherokee, between the Cherokee Nation and the U.S. government, to investigate what are the short and long term, and what we mean by long term here. I'll present mostly the intergenerational preliminary results that we have, impact of financial reparations. We'll be using the full count historical census data from about 1900 to 1940. A lot of the issues have been discussed previously by the keynotes and others here, but we'll look at things like literacy, employment, migration, and some measures of assimilation that we've come up with. We've also linked the 1940 census to the Social Security Administration death record. So we'll show you some preliminary results for mortality that mostly apply for the second and third generation, so people who were in the 1940 census. So what happened here is, I'm sorry, I think I skipped something here, but let me just tell you what this is. What happened was that the Supreme Court ruled in 1906 that the Cherokee Nation was due reparations for the Trail of Tears that they were subjected to, and in the 1860s, and there was a lengthy process, and the Trail of Tears, for those who haven't studied it in middle school, was the relocation of Native Americans from the mostly eastern U.S. and southeastern U.S. to Oklahoma, the Oklahoma territories, during which, by some accounts, 80% of people died in the process, and they were then relocated to Oklahoma, and a lot of court cases ensued, mostly in the late 19th century. But in 1906, the Supreme Court ruled that the U.S. government owed the Cherokee Nation reparations for their ancestors' mostly experience in the Trail of Tears. So between 1903 and 1909, there was a commission that was headed by Guillaume Miller, and that was tasked with finding every one of the descendants, and some who were still alive from the original peoples who were subjected to the Trail of Tears, and sending them certain amounts in financial reparations. So the commission got applications, and we are looking at people who applied and got the reparations, and looking at the effects of those reparations in the long term. What we're trying to do two separate specifications. Now, an individual could apply on behalf of themselves and their dependents. So if you could prove that you were a descendant of somebody who was subjected to the Trail of Tears, then you would be sent reparations if they deemed you part of really a descendant, and they had to check that. There's a specific way they were doing that. They actually went to great lengths to try to really find people. And then, so if you had more descendants, you would receive larger sums. So that's one way of in which we can look at receiving more money versus less money, since we're looking at the effects of reparations. On the other hand, we would really like to use differences between people who were marginally admitted versus those who were marginally rejected into the reparations budget. That's what we call the extensive margin. We're currently working on this. We are trying to use a judges-like specification strategy because we've noticed a big difference in acceptance rates depending on what lawyer and what notary helped people prepare their applications. That's a much more laborious process, but right now we are working on what I'm going to be showing you is variation coming from the intensive margin, which is people who applied for the reparations with a certain number of descendants, and then for various reasons, mostly births of new children, but sometimes deaths. Unfortunately, we have pretty high child mortality. They end up having fewer or more descendants by the time the money is disbursed. And so how much money you get depends on how many people you put on your original application. But then you may have more people in the family, or you may have fewer people in the family. And that's the intensive margin, which we are going to be utilizing for the set of results I will be showing you today. So just an illustration of the distribution of how many children were claimed on the application versus how many children are included in the 1910 census. Remember, 1909 is when people start receiving the reparations. So 1910 is the year that we can use to figure out how many children you have. Do you have fewer or less? The mass is at 0, but you see there is some distribution on both sides. Some people lost some family members, some people gained some family members, and these are the people who were approved for the reparations. So we have some variation in here that we can use to identify effects. So the Guion-Miller application records, we had some heroic efforts trying to digitize information from those. Are the primary one of the sources of data, and we'll take the names of those on those records plus some additional information, including right now what we're working with is the notary signatures on those applications, and we'll link those to the historical census data. I think Trent, I guess, was the one mentioning that we had this conference at the NBR, which showed that the rate of matching across time for different groups is very different, and some of those rates are very low. We were surprised to find that actually the match rate for Native Americans was the second highest after white Anglo-Saxon names in the historical censuses. That was something that really surprised us, but it is something that is working for us. The Miller files look like something like this. This is just a digitized picture of what it looks like. So we extracted information from this and took the names and looked at but we used actually the census tree as well to link people across the 1910, 20, 30, and 40 censuses. So how big are the transfers? The transfers generally were about, the average transfer was about half a year's salary for the average recipient, and was about enough to put down a mortgage payment or a house payment for purchasing a new home. So it wasn't humongous, it wasn't really huge, but it was large enough to really help people out. So this is the amounts that we were talking about. And again, remember, we're talking about people mostly living in Oklahoma. So they're even, relatively speaking, more have more buying power, more purchasing power in Oklahoma than the average of the US. So here's finally got the results, 2 minutes left. I'm showing you here various tables from our paper that's still in works. So the first thing you will look at is for all applicants, the people who received the money, the applicants, not their descendants. If you received more money because you got fewer descendants, you have home, you're more likely to own your home. You have a higher occupational standing index. This is from the usual historical occupational indices, and you're less likely to live in a rural area. So receiving the reparations results in better home ownership and occupational standing for those who applied pretty much right away. Then we looked at dependents, and we got right away, these are short-term effects. 1910, dependents are already more likely to be in school, in the labor, and less likely to be working. And they're also more likely to be literate. The next thing we looked at is here. We can show you the longer term effects. So this is the 1920, 30, and 40. We see that the home ownership effects actually persist at least through the 1930s. We also have a persistence in the occupational standing index, and still somewhat negative effects of living in the rural area, but positive effects on remaining on the reservation. So we're seeing people moving from the farm and rural areas of the reservation. And again, remember, Oklahoma is pretty much all of it is a reservation. So they're moving into more urban areas if they receive the reparations. So I wanted to show you the mortality outcomes. So these are quite dicey right now because, again, we're linking the 1940 census. So these are people who are the children of the original recipients. Pretty much nothing is found. I'm almost done. We find nothing for the 30 and 1920 census simply because they're not represented in the SSA data that we have on mortality. But for the people that we have born around 1940, we do find negative effects on mortality, which is what you would expect if the reparations ended up improving the overall economic standing of the entire family in the longer run as well. So briefly to wrap up, the preliminary findings, we are still working on another identification strategy, but what we've done so far, we find pretty strong effects that suggest that this one-time payment, even though it was just one time, it can have strong intergenerational impacts. And one thing that I would like to point out is that we do believe that a lot of the effects that we find have to do with the fact that these are reparations. And so rather than just a one-time transfer, so they have a slightly different effect, nuanced compared to what you would get if you were just getting one-time unconditional cash transfer to people. So a reparation payment is working somewhat differently from what you would think would be the result of just a one-time transfer for poverty or some other reason that's unrelated to remedying something that people really thought had to be addressed. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions.
Hi, thank you. My name is Ben Rodriguez. This is my job market paper for this year, Infrastructure Investment and Economic Development, with a focus on the numbered highway system. For those of you who might not remember, the numbered highway system, or NHS, as I'll refer to it, is the first federal highway constructed in the United States. Its construction predated, for example, the interstate highway by about 30 years. It's a relatively understudied period of infrastructure investment in the U.S. economy, from my understanding, but adds to a long line of research on kind of what are the effects of infrastructure investment. To give you some headline numbers on what's going on, at the beginning of the period, around 1920, there was very little rural highways that were actually paved, so it made it very difficult to travel between areas using an automobile. So from between 1920 and 1950, the fraction of paved roads increased from about 12% to 52%. If you think about this in terms of kind of a quantitative spatial literature, what this means is that there's going to be construction of roads. This is going to lower transportation costs, which is going to increase market access, and there'll be gains from trade along that line. What I want to do in this paper is kind of a new angle that focuses on kind of regional integration of how households will kind of move to be near highways. This creates a higher population density, and by extension will create a tougher market. So what I mean in particular, focusing on that, is that I'll be kind of looking at what this effect has on basically business ownership or the decision to be self-employed. It's a very interesting period for self-employment as well. For example, there was about a 33% decline in self-employment from 1920 to 1950, focusing on males who were of prime working age. To explain why I think infrastructure investment has an effect on kind of self-employment, imagine with me that you create a road that's going to lower transportation costs. This is going to lower the cost of living. This might attract individuals to move closer to roads. But since land is in fixed supply, this will increase the price of the price of living, the cost of living, until basically you're offsetting any kind of transportation cost gains. As a result, though, for business owners who have to lease basically a storefront, a farm, or kind of a manufacturing plant, if they own it, for example, this is going to cut into their business profits, and marginally less productive business owners are going to be enticed to exit. So what I'm kind of doing in this job market paper is, one, validating that this is a relevant mechanism for the NHS and kind of quantifying its aggregate effects over those 30 years. In terms of reduced form evidence, what I use is an instrumental variable, kind of building off of previous work that looks at the interstate highways with a kind of a new twist, using a hypothetical highway network that was recommended by the US Army for the layout of the NHS. With this instrumental variable, what I find in relative differences is that the local population for treated counties, counties that were on the NHS or had direct access to it, increased by about 44%. At the same time, self-employment declines by about 4.3 percentage points. It's very interesting, though, because during this period, there's the story of structural transformation where we were switching from kind of an agricultural economy towards manufacturing. This is not kind of driving the results. Instead, I'm going to kind of push this idea that with greater population density comes greater fixed costs of doing business. So in the second half of the paper, what I do is kind of try and get at the aggregate implications of this, writing down a spatial equilibrium model with many different regions, mobile labor, and trade of goods. My innovation to the baseline model is basically an occupational choice where individuals know their business acumen, how productive are they as entrepreneurs, and can decide optimally between being self-employed versus a salaried employee. And the main thing being that individuals have to basically purchase a parcel of land to operate their business. I use this model to create counterfactual exercises where, in the baseline, prior to the construction of NHS, it's going to be a certain kind of costliness to trade goods. But as the NHS is constructed, this is going to lower the cost of transportation, increasing market access, how easy it is to move between or ship between counties. This is going to relocate individuals closer to the roads, and as a result, lower self-employment. The model can explain about 1/5 of the aggregate decline in the self-employment rate over this period, for example. For the sake of time, I'll skip on the literature. But for the roadmap, just beginning with kind of the historical contexts. So the NHS was recommended following World War I, where the US federal government wanted to invest in a paved road network that connected all 48 states within the continental US, or the US at the time. As you can see here, this is the plan that was developed over basically a 5-year period through the Bureau of Public Roads with state and local governments, as well as the US military, to identify areas that would benefit most, economic hubs and population hubs that would benefit most from having road access. What I did for like my second and third part of my 4th year was basically take maps like this, digitize them. I went through state atlases as well to digitize basically the progress of these roads in terms of their pavement, because pavement is basically the deciding factor of whether or not people would likely use roads or not. On the other hand, what I'm going to be using kind of in terms of these outcomes and self-employment, thank you for everyone that's put this together. But just looking at individual self-employment, primarily for the prime working age male population, if you want to kind of look at a broad level what's happening in the economy, in the baseline, you get to see that self-employment is actually kind of correlated with differences in population density. On the left-hand side, sorry, for panel A, you can see in the baseline 1920 years, there's a very flat self-employment rate for rural counties. But as you move closer to population dense areas in the country, you see that the self-employment rate will decline. Looking at differences over that 30-year period, kind of at the county level as well, you can see that changes in the log change in population, which is 1-for-1 with density because sizes of counties don't necessarily change that much, or at least I treat them as fixed. You have a negative correlation for local self-employment rate as well. So moving on to reduced form evidence, what I want to do is compare the differences in these outcomes for counties that were on versus off the NHS, whether or not there was basically a road going through your county. Just simple OLS would be fraught because, the Bureau of Public Roads was meant to connect areas that were population or economic hubs. So what I do is kind of borrowing from the research that worked on the interstate highways. There's something that's often used. It's called a Pershing map. It's the U.S. Army's recommendation for where highways should be. It wasn't just recommended for the interstate highway. It was recommended for the NHS. So during this period, it has a relevancy. Does it is it valid? Does it pass the exclusion restriction? A very similar question would be, does, the U.S. Army's recommendation for logistics and national defense, are those uncorrelated with local economic development? I would argue no, but there's been work by Borusiak and Hall on recentering kind of these endogenous network effects to kind of draw out the unexpected recommendation by the U.S. Armies for being included on the Pershing map. So using that as my IV for whether or not you're on the NHS or not. What you can see here is we're not comparing, for example, in panel A, we're not comparing yellow to green. That would be kind of the unadjusted Pershing IV. Instead, we're looking at the potential unexpected inclusions to the Pershing map, which is much more varied across the state, across the country. A cool thing about this is once you if you want to check for baseline differences for whether or not you're recommended by the U.S. Army, only after recentering do we see that there's very little, if at all, statistical correlation with baseline differences and the Pershing IV as recentered. What does that mean for population growth over this period? Just looking at long-run differences in population changes. Primarily from 1920 to 1950. What these are two-stage least squares coefficient regressions. For the set of rural counties, it's robust to including metropolitan areas after recentering. But I also control for kind of baseline differences in population size, county size, physical area, and also in terms of the fraction of a county that's easily travelable by automobiles. So whether or not you're covered by water or, for example, mountains. What I get from this is about a 44 log point increase in population over this 30-year period, with very little actually occurring in the pre-construction period, which is kind of reassuring as well. If I look at individual self-employment over this time period, kind of just looking, at the county level, at individuals who are in a specific county that has NHS access, the self-employment rate declines by about 4.3 percentage points. Here again, what I do is break this out based off of whether or not you work in agriculture, manufacturing, or services. What you should be able to see here is that the decline in self-employment is not necessarily is concentrated within agriculture and services, not so much manufacturing, because the self-employment rate was already rather low, in my opinion. And also, building on that, there's not really a sectoral reallocation story. Individuals are not exiting self-employment because they're shifting towards the low self-employment manufacturing sector. If anything, there's very weak statistical evidence to show that there might be a shift towards non-tradable services, but that's weak in general. I wouldn't rely on that too much. If I linked people and looked at kind of their exposure to county access to the highways between 1940 and 1950, I could see again from kind of this mover response that there's still a decline in self-employment, whether or not you had access to the NHS. And what I also do is look at kind of these pre-move county characteristics on whether or not you're moving to a denser place, somewhere that's closer to a metro area, or somewhere that's generally more expensive. And what I find is that these density measures are actually soaking up a lot of the heterogeneous response. That means that individuals who are moving to denser areas are ones that are exiting self-employment rather than the rest of the sample. Now, I learned a lot over lunch, for example, so thank you for those comments in terms of reweighting and kind of the things that you're supposed to do when you link data. So I wouldn't lean on these too much, but I'll be making robustness checks on those, for example. So to measure the aggregate implications, because what those coefficient estimates are basically relative differences. To get at the aggregate, what I do is write down a theoretical kind of like a stylized model, which has many different counties to reflect the economy of the United States, where individuals are able to move across counties. Sorry, I'm also checking the time. Moving across counties, and what I add is this ability to choose whether or not you should be in self-employment relative to your profitability, your productivity, and also the cost of purchasing a unit of land. From the model, you basically are able to predict that changes in market access, transportation costs will change the population size, and with a knock-on effect of how it affects the aggregates or the self-employment rate. Skipping calibration. If I look at the kind of the effect on the aggregate self-employment rate, in just the observed change, I see about a 33% decline. If I look purely at the effects of how market access changes as a result of kind of the difference in transportation costs from the NHS, I assume, for example, that traveling by a paved road lowers the transportation costs by about 25%. What I'm able to pick up is about 1/5 of the overall decline in the self-employment rate, about 6 percentage points, for example. So just for my concluding remarks, this project is meant to be kind of a focus on the interesting effects of infrastructure investment. What I find is that the NHS caused the long-run structural change in the U.S. labor market, shifting away from self-employment towards salaried employment. There's both reduced form evidence that I try and draw on, and also a stylized model to kind of get at both the relative as well as the aggregate. Overall, what I find is that the aggregate responses explains about 1/5 of the decline in the self-employment rate over that 30-year period. So with that, I would appreciate all of your comments. Thank you again for understanding and letting us present over Zoom. Thank you very much.
Just a second. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Yu-Jhen Chen. I'm a PhD student in sociology at Graduate Center City University of New York City, CUNY. Yeah, like introduction say CUNY. I just want to add, yeah, it's City University in case you don't know. And then I'm honored to present on the behalf of our team. Today, I will share some key findings from our project, understanding late arriving immigrants' social security, eligibility, and retirement security. Before I start, I want to acknowledge that this project was originally funded through the New York RDRC by Social Security Administration. It began as a pilot project for mixed methods research, combining microdata and also interviews. And unfortunately, it was terminated February this year due to stop work order. So as you know, the situation today, yeah, as we mentioned in the keynote speech. So now we are seeking additional funding in order to continue our quantitative interview as we originally proposed. So today I will share the quantitative analysis from, in our project. Here's our research team. Our team members come from diverse disciplines, including economy, sociology, and aging policy, and immigration health, with expertise in both quantitative and qualitative research. Here, I want to know that we also have deep fieldwork experiences and the strong community connection with the local organization with the in the New York City, and that's why we started this project. And here is a brief roadmap. For the sake of the time, I will skip over some of the background detail so we can have more time for the finding and our result. So the roadmap is like this. Okay, I will skip this one. And when it comes to the retirement security of older adults, previous research has documented the challenges that older immigrants face in retirement. Things like the have lower income, lower rate of social security and Medicare participation, and yes, and also the more relies on the supplemental security income. But however, when we review those work of the older immigrant, we notice that something is missing, the age at migration. We argue that it's not only about being an immigrant, or it's all about their age. When they arriving in the U.S. matter in shaping their retirement security outcomes. So in this project, we focus on the late arriving immigrant and to examine the impact of the age of arrival to the Social Security eligibility. So who are the late arriving immigrants? In our research, we define those who arrive in the U.S. at age 50 or older. And many come for the family unification or to escape a hardship in their home country. And it's very important to note that late arriving immigrants are a growing demographic. Since post 1955 immigration changes, there has been a significant increase in the migration among older adults. In fact, using CPS data, we find that over past 2 decades, the number has more than doubled, especially among the Asian immigrant and the Hispanic immigrants. So from our previous field work in New York City, actually we find that the old immigrant who arrive in the US in older age, yeah, like I just say like 50 or plus, face multiple challenges and feel like totally left out of the social security system. And from the previous literature, we know that late arriving immigrants, they actually keep working in their older age, like they continue to work. However, some of them never built enough credit to qualify for the social security. In fact, near of half of never beneficiaries in the social security system are late arriving immigrants. So here in our project, our research question is how does the timing of the immigrant influence social security eligibility and other programs related to retirement? So before I continue, I just want to give an overlook about like how I am talking about the Social Security program eligibility in case you may not really that familiar with the whole system. I think the key point here is that the Social Security, the main thing our project focus, and the Medicare, they are both work history-based program, which require 40 work credit, like it's about to 10 years to be qualified. And on the other hand, the supplementary security income, SSI, and the Medicare, they are main tested program. They are designed for the population who are with only with a very low income. So just a look. And so to address our research question, we specifically examine the few factors that will affect late arriving immigrants' access to Social Security benefit. And yeah, the first thing is I just mentioned, like the age of arrival. Just want to say that in this project we focus on the old immigrants who are over 62 years old. And the second factor is the thing we want to emphasize here is totalization agreement. Actually, U.S. has Social Security totalization agreement with 30 countries, which allow immigrants to transfer their social work history after they move to the U.S. However, most of those countries are European countries, and like most sending, the major sending countries like China, India, Mexico are excluded from the treaty. So, and the third one is the work history eligibility. And here is like, as I just say, for the Social Security assets, you need to have like a 10-year work history to qualify. So I will be very quick. And then, so here we want to know when and who can get enough work credit to be qualifying. Okay, I will be like skip some slides to make the finishing time. So for the data, we use IPUMS, SSI IPUMS data to do the individual level analysis. And the second data we use is SIP synthetic beta data. And is the SIP is a survey of income and program participation data. And I think this unique data set linked to the Social Security Administration record, so which allow us to explore detailed information and more accurate record from the Social Security receipt, and also the work credit accumulations. Okay, so here are our findings. Start with descriptive results. And as you can see, the yellow bar here is early arrival, which is much higher in participant in the Social Security program than the late arrival. As you can see, when they reach to their 70, 18% of the early arrival has already in the Social Security, receiving Social Security benefit. On the other hand, the late arrival, even in the oldest age group, is only 50% of participant rate. And when you see the line is represent the Social Security benefit amount. You can see that the early arrival receive more than the late arrival. Okay, this one is basically we want to show the how the totalization agreement and the late arrival shape the access to the Social Security. Okay, so that is a descriptive table, and I just want to show, I think can show more in our regression result. As our logistic regression results show that after control all the demographic, control the demographic variable, and you can see the late arrival immigrants still have really strong negative effect, and it shows that late arrival immigrant has less odds of receiving Social Security benefit than the early arrival, and it's almost 80% lower. And then from the no totalization agreement country also have a negative result, and the interaction term also show the negative result, suggesting there's a confounding disadvantage for the people who are arrival US late and also from the country without totalization agreement. And here is the interaction term. And here, I think I will do very quickly, just want to show that as we just talk about some people say all immigrant rely more on the mean test support like SSI. I think this is also a case for the late arrival immigrant, and even is much lower compared to the, not lower, sorry, it's like the participant rate for SSI for late arrival even higher compared to late arrival immigrants. Okay, so this is also the case for the Medicare and the Medicaid. So it's basically depends on if you have time to accumulate your work history. And the last part is about we want to go to see the detail about the worker credit accumulation by using SIP data. So we want to know why there's a great gap between early arrival and the late arrival. So you can see here at the age 55, late arrival only accrues only 19 work credits. And if they want to eligible for the Social Security, they have to on average to the 70s. Okay, so I think that's 2 pages. And I think we also do the regression model for the SIP data, and it verified our observation that the arrival aging of arrival do reduce the work credit accumulation. And there's some finding we can talk more if you're interested. Okay. And here is our implication. I think we just want to emphasize the late arrival immigrant often miss out in the Social Security policy discussion, and also it's not enough like support in the U.S. systems. And the next step, I just say, as we say, we want to continue the interview work, and also for the quantitative analysis, we are thinking about if there's any neighborhood effect about the late arrival immigrant. Okay, it's just a map. Thank you.
All right, hey everyone. My name is Todd Nobles. I'm a PhD student at the University of Washington in the sociology department. First, I just want to say thanks to the organizers for this great conference. It's running amazingly smoothly, and it's great to be a participant here. And thank you all for stopping by the session to listen in. Today, I want to talk to you a little bit about an ongoing project that I'm on with Peter Catron and Kate Stovel, also at UW, where we're looking at the impact of internment on Germans and Austrians in the US during World War I. So with this work, we're fundamentally interested in answering the question of what happens to immigrants when the country they're born in goes to war with the country that they're living in. And today, I'm focused on some of our early investigations into the socioeconomic and labor market consequences of internment. So as with most questions, we're not the first to try and look into it. Previous research on this topic of internment in the US focuses largely on Japanese immigrants and looks at the World War II case. This research has found negative impacts of internment in terms of labor market outcomes, school performance for children, and lower age of mortality. However, the characteristics of the internment case in the Japanese example make it difficult for study, and that there's no great control or comparison group. So these studies often use Chinese immigrants from the same time period, or very small subgroups of Japanese Americans in Hawaii. Is that echo? No, not loud, I'm sorry. Japanese Americans in Hawaii, not subject to internment, or Japanese Americans from different time periods. So these, for sort of causal identification strategies, are less than ideal. And so what about our case for Germans in America in World War I? Some have looked into sort of how general anti-German sentiment and discrimination has influenced migration patterns for all German Americans in the US at the time. And also some have looked into sort of increases in name changes or increases in citizen applications to try to escape anti-German sentiment at the time. But to our knowledge, ours is the first to study explicitly internment of this population in World War I. And so this case offers not only another case of internment, but we think the nature of the internment process, where a really small subset of the very large German population living in the US at the time was interned, offers the possibility of better understanding selection into internment. And then, as I'll discuss, also, we're dealing with the classic selection problems of tracking people over time through censuses, like we discussed in the, or like was discussed in the previous keynote. So quick, a very brief history lesson of what happened in this case. So the Alien Enemies Act has been used 3 or maybe today now 4 times in the U.S. First in 1812 during the War of 1812, and then in World War I, which I'll return to briefly, and then, like I mentioned, the most commonly discussed is the detention of Japanese Americans in World War II. And then maybe it's being used today from the news. It's a little hard to tell. But what happened during World War I, just to give some background to this case, in the early 1900s, German immigrants sit as a fairly high status immigrant group. They have relatively high occupation standing and considered a sort of model ethnic minority, if you will. They also had a really vibrant sort of German culture and institutions. So they had local language newspapers, some German language schools, and vibrant community clubs and groups. However, once World War I breaks out in 1914, sentiments towards this group and generally hyphenated Americans, as they were referred to at the time, turns for the worse. And this sort of culminates in on April 16th of 1917, where Woodrow Wilson authorizes arrests of Germans living in the U.S. under the Alien Enemies Act. So that's the second time in history this was used. Additionally, over this time period, there's sort of increasing capability of the government to police and surveil citizens and residents in the U.S. And so throughout this time, according to the U.S. Marshals, they registered just shy of 500,000 enemy aliens living in the U.S. Sadly, those documents do not live on. That would be ideal, but we lose things to history. And then they also detained somewhere around 6,000 Germans and Austrians. This number fluctuates depending on which historian you're looking at. The citations, we're still working on finding where everyone's getting their numbers for these claims. We have our own number, which I'll share with you briefly. We're all in the same ballpark. And then importantly, after the war ended, there was some repatriation of these folks who were interned, as well as just other Germans in the US who wanted to return back to Europe. And so we do have records on that as well that I'll discuss a bit. So with this sort of lay of the land of what happened here, a brief note on what life was like in these camps. So here are 4 images from the internment camps in the US. There were 4 camps total, with 2 primary ones, one in Georgia and one in Utah. Most reports indicate that camp life wasn't horrible, some variation around how much labor people were forced to perform, depending on if you were a legitimate POW, so a German sailor captured, or if you were a German resident in the US who got swept up in this. The top left here is just a picture of people getting ready to be transferred between some camps. The bottom right here shows sort of an Americanization class that was going on in these camps. The effort to Americanize folks at the time was sort of in its heyday, unfortunately. And then top right, just to give a feel for what the sort of layout of these institutions that these people were living in look like. So with this bit of history under our belts, what do we actually, or how do we actually study this case? So as I alluded to, the primary data sources are scans of, no worries, 5,886 internment cards. And then we match these to the IPUMS full count censuses using the ABE algorithms. As you would expect, given that we're using the ABE approach, we match on name, age, and place of birth. In our case, sex really isn't a concern. It's an almost exclusively male phenomenon in terms of men getting swept up in this. We have 14 out of 5,000 women. So for now, there's not much we can do in studying that. And we have more data coming soon, as I'll discuss in the following slides, for sort of how we triangulate who was actually a US resident at the time versus who was a German sailor that got swept up in this capturing process as well. So just to add a little bit more fun in terms of tracing people over time, the particulars of this case. But with this linkage approach in mind, how successful are we at finding people, and sort of what states do we find them in? There we go. So as I mentioned, we have just shy of 6,000 interned, primarily male. And then, as you would expect, given that it's the characteristics of the war, they're almost all exclusively German or Austro-Hungarian. There's a few people who either lied about their birthplace or maybe got swept up and weren't actually intended to be interned. We're still looking into those, but for now, we're working with sample or a population of intern of 5,774. And so we have, at this point, essentially 4 outcomes for these folks. We have records of who died while they were interned. We recently discovered that those are not fully complete, but I'm heading back to the archives to get the rest of them. We also have repatriation lists for who was sent back. And here, this link here, this 1273 is just a name match. So we're not extraordinarily confident these are the same folks, but there's also, like, we know they were interned, we know some people were repatriated, we have a bit of background knowledge there that gives us some confidence in these matches. But that number it requires further investigation. Additionally, when we match the censuses using nicest matches in this case, we have match rates for 1920 and 1930 here, and then the final outcome that we have is unknown. The question mark and the sort of feedback loop between matched and census and repatriated is something that I've been grappling with recently of you could feasibly be repatriated and then come back to the US. The German economy wasn't doing great for some periods here. People may have come back. It's a little unclear. So these are all sort of a bit up in the air as we work on our triangulation strategy for how we track these people in various data sources. So what can we actually say about these folks now that we have them linked to the IPUMS data? So if we look at their occupational status using a slightly modified version of his class, which is meant to be sort of comparable socioeconomic status over time, we can see that the interned are from higher status occupations or social classes than the non-interned if we look at 1910. Now, by looking at 1910, we know we're missing some folks because there was immigration that occurred between 10 and 20, obviously. But for now, this is one approach we have for looking at sort of what does the population of internees look like compared to our comparison group. And so this brings to mind also the selection processes that I talked about earlier of in this project, we're juggling both selection processes into internment that we're trying to understand. So who gets swept up in this, as well as who is traceable across the censuses as we start to crosswalk between censuses. So we know that the interned were in higher status occupations pre-war, or at least we have some initial evidence that they might have been. What can we say about the actual impact of internment? And here, we are not at a point in this project where we have a perfectly identified causal strategy. So the claims I'm presenting here are directional claims where we think we have a direction that we're heading to investigate further. Don't take these and write them down, put them in a book anywhere. But we think we have an interesting direction. So at this point, our results suggest that internment impacts people differently depending on their class standing. The table I'm showing here, each column is a separate match. So that 1910 match is its own match, 1920 is its own match, 1930 is its own match. If we try to crosswalk across, just because we start with so few people, we end up with only about 200 or 300 by the time we make it to 1930. We're hoping with some additional data cleaning that we can get that up, and that'll give us some more power to actually investigate the people that we can track. But for now, what we have is some initial indications that if you look at these two coefficients here, when we're looking at white collar interned versus the reference group of non-interned, that they in 1920 and 1930 don't seem to have a negative impact of internment, which is a little surprising, but there are plausible reasons for how the wealth and status might have some protective effects. On the other hand, if we look at sort of lower class or lower skilled occupations and classes as defined by his class, down here for semi-skilled blue collar, farmer interned, and unskilled interned, we don't see statistically significant results, but we do see the direction flip here. So there's some initial indications that this might be a direction worth probing to try to understand who is protected or who is most impacted by internment. So what have we learned so far? That the interned were in higher statuses occupations pre-war, and that the long-run impact of internment may vary by class, but stay tuned for the finalized findings there. We're still working to understand the two selection processes at play in this study, and we're hoping that with additional digitization and cleaning of some new data sources that we'll be able to more confidently say that this person was actually a U.S. resident that got swept up in internment, versus a German sailor that was in the camps alongside them. And then briefly to return to this, so if we think of here on the left side, there's a whole other process at play of who was arrested but not interned that we're interested in exploring more to try to understand this sort of selection into internment process. And the data source that I'm working on digitizing for that is the index cards that list everyone who was arrested or detained, but we don't see all of them show up in the internment. So folks who were mentioned in the previous talk who work on OCR projects, I'd love to talk to you after this. And with that, I will wrap up and thank you all for listening and looking forward to questions.